Over the last several years, there has been talk of the possibility of relocating the tracks. Both the cities of Surrey and White Rock have said they are in the process of applying for this relocation, and federal support is necessary. What is your position on this, and is it something you would commit to becoming a reality for this riding? If yes, would you make this happen when others have failed in the past? If no, what other solutions do you have for the community?
For our safety and for our environment, we really need to move those train tracks away from the steep slopes that are unstable and which we have seen over and over again be the subject of landslides in that area. And it's just a miracle that a train hasn't been wiped out by a landslide in that area. So we might consider, at least I would, a two-pronged approach to addressing this issue, using both incentives towards change and disincentives for the status quo. Some of the disincentives would include, in my plan, setting very low speed limits through White Rock, the Bluff area, and Crescent Beach, banning certain dangerous goods on the trains altogether, restricting the lengths of the trains, and encouraging continual challenges by citizens groups using the Canadian Transportation Agency's mediation and arbitration process. This takes up time, and it also is a legal burden and a costly burden on BNSF. And it's like getting them with a million bee stings. We've got to do that. The incentives we could look at for relocation are to provide several safer optional routes with fewer restrictions on the speed and length of the trains. Such an approach would require collaboration amongst the federal government, the municipalities involved, the provincial government, and the First Nations as well that could be impacted. And I also see a role for the collaboration amongst the various governments in developing a national transportation strategy that would address this, as well as infrastructure funding and developing alternative routes and passing regulations for safety of all rail lines.
Thank you, Pixie.
Whether the train tracks should be moved is a matter that should be discussed and negotiated with the industry with the trains and with the private property owners. These decisions should be moved away from the federal government and be brought into the provincial and municipal governments. Thank you.
No matter what your concern is about the trains, noise, vibration, beach access, whatever, we're not going to be able to do anything other than relocate them to solve those problems. We're not going to change.
Yeah.
We're not going to be able to change the operating rules or anything like that. So we need to reroute them. It's become more urgent, as my colleagues have said here. And I want to congratulate Mayor Baldwin for taking a stand on that and being steadfast in trying to make that happen. I also want to chide Dianne Watts for initially supporting it and then abruptly changing her position to something more palatable. Changing her position to something more palatable to the Conservative Party. I also want to congratulate local activists like Ken Jones and Paula Williams who have taken on this cause as volunteers in a very professional way, doing their homework and getting their facts straight and sticking with what some might say is a hopeless cause. They've been very successful at doing that and in working in collaboration with the local municipalities and authorities. My understanding from Ken, who has been an advocate for relocating the track since 1973 and is now the spokesperson for Smart Rail, is that moving the tracks inland may not be as unrealistic and as expensive as most of us think. The overpasses are already in place. It's just a short section that would need to be double tracked. Ken told me today that he feels more hopeful than ever at this point and described relocation as very feasible. He felt it could be done for less than $200 million from Canadian sources and less than $50 million from the US side. And that cost would be shared by the federal government, the provincial government here, and the US federal government in Washington state, as well as BNSF and Amtrak. So if you share all those costs around, it really doesn't add up to too much. And if you want to compare, $200 million is what it's going to take for the city of Vancouver to remove the Georgia Street viaducts. So and also, what are our lives worth here? 200 million, 500 million? What does it matter?
Yeah. I read today in the Surrey Leader that rail safety and rail relocation continue to be key local issues for Dianne Watts, she says. And she is looking forward to arguing for both in Ottawa. Well, I don't notice her here tonight. She was used for an announced pledge to cover up to $700 million of a $2.1 billion light rail transit network in Surrey, but I wonder how much influence she would really have, or whether she was just window dressing. It could be rather like the case of Rob Ford in Toronto, who was fine to follow when he was popular from the point of view of the Harper government, but not so much when he was an inconvenience. Maybe it will happen, but how to do it? To begin with, you can expect Burlington Northern resistance. They are a powerful corporate interest with no interest in moving the tracks as far as I can see. They have a very small presence in Canada compared to their overall operations, that they expect Canadians to live with their activity, which is not permitted from US ports. How they do it is up to us as a sovereign nation, I suggest. And there is a constitutional means of doing this. Under the BNA Act 1867, sorry Judy, it is the BNA Act, not the Constitution Act. Pierre Trudeau rewrote history. There are declaratory powers available in Section 92 A, B, and C, by which the federal government has the right and the responsibility to act in the interest of Canadians when there are borders crossed, and when even within provinces where the interest of Canadians is imperiled. And this is, I think, one clear case where that is true. Thank you.
Let me say relocation is essential. It is the only solution. And just to make sure that you know what we are saying through our party, printed copies of all my remarks will stand the close scrutiny, and I've put them down on paper. Over the next 10 years, a Liberal government will double federal infrastructure spending to $125 billion over 10 years. This Liberal Infrastructure Fund provides assurance of committed infrastructure funding for the federal share of jointly agreed federal, provincial, municipal, and all major infrastructure priorities. Prior to this meeting, we sent off all our information to our party headquarters, and they said that if indeed this is true, if your municipalities, First Nations, organizations like you get together, then we will work with you and ensure that this comes to fruition. There is an easy enough plan to relocate. If you want to do it, you can do it underground, and I will say that one of my advisors is the same advisor that Larry spoke of today, and I totally agree with everything that he has said. It is possible, it is doable, and it is essential that it happens. But we can only do that if we all work together. And one of the things that I think governments forget, and I think this was said before, whether it's the federal government with Harper, or even some of the cities, that they have to work together with the community to ensure that these ideas are put to fruition and some of the solutions happen. So we were 100% behind you, but more to the point, we have money that if you want your city, or your city wants to put that towards spending for this infrastructure project, then they have to put it down as a priority and put it on paper and work with the federal government to do so. It can and will be done if your cities have the will.
Thank you, Judy. So we'll have a 2-minute rebuttal. If any, Larry, if you'd like to go ahead first.
Thank you. I just want to thank Brian for saying what he did about the BNA Act. I know Brian has an amazing knowledge of history that it's in his brain. He doesn't need even to look up notes. It's incredible. But I wonder how the BNA Act that would give Canada the right to protect us would be affected by some of these new investor-state agreements. because I understand that a corporate investor can sue either the municipal, provincial, or federal governments if they are denied their expectation of gain or profit in any kind of a commercial venture. And if they do have that right, perhaps the law stands, but my understanding is that the arbitrations happen outside of the law, and we will never know about them, and we will never know the outcomes of those or how much taxpayers have had to pay as fines for having prevented them from earning the gains and profits that they had expected.
Thank you, Larry. Anybody else?
Can I ask, well, hopefully Brian will get a chance to comment on that.
Brian, yeah, you look like you'd like to answer.
Yes, please, thank you. I think you've hit the nail on the head. It is extremely important that we see things like state-owned enterprises, which are in essence the extension of nation-states into other countries through corporations which are really owned by foreign countries rather than perceived as private corporations. These present a threat to our own sovereignty. Similarly, where they are simply just private corporations, the kind of risk that you suggest is a very real concern. However, I would suggest to you that the declaratory powers present in the Constitution of Canada takes precedence over any sort of international agreement between sovereign states or within a series of states in a treaty that derived simply by corporate or even national interests between parties. The Constitution of Canada is all about the sovereignty of Canada, and it is about the best interests of Canadians, and it is that which proves to require court cases, which should be the deciding issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Municipalities and the province can also be involved in the question of land assembly. If we were going to be looking at a relocation, there's a whole question of where's the land going to come from. There would be a role for the municipality to be involved. All our municipalities that would be affected could be involved in negotiating land assembly blocks. And we could use very creative measures like land swaps. Like, for example, we could swap the land that's currently owned by BNSF where the train is located for land inland that's flatter and more conducive to rail bed setting. So we can be creative, but we have to work together as a team.